Braja Janaranjana Damuna Tiravanachari Jai Srila Prabhupada. Gopimanandi Hari Hari Bol. So today we're reading from Canto 2, Chapter 3, verse 19. And coincidentally, today is the beginning of Tulsi Jaldan, because in India it's now fast approaching the hottest part of the summer. And whoever's been in India at this time, you'll see Tulsi has like a terracotta pot with a little hole suspended above her with some tulla or cotton in the hole, and then she steadily gets a drip, 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 drip of nice refreshing cold water all day. So today is the beginning of that. Svavid varahustra samstuta purusha pashu Nayad karna patopetu Jatunam gadaragajaha. Sva, a dog. Vidavaraha, the village hog who eats stool. Ustra, the camel. Karai, and by the asses. Samstutaha, perfectly praised. Purusha, a person. Pashu, animal. Na, never. Yat, of him. Karna, ear. Pata, path. Upita, reached. Jatu, at any time. Nama, the holy name. Gada Gurjaha, Lord Krishna, the deliverer from all evils. Translation. Men who are like hogs, dogs, camels and asses, praise those men who never listen to the transcendental pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna, the deliverer from evils. Repeat after me. Men who are like dogs, hogs, camels and asses, praise those men who never listen to the transcendental pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna, the deliverer from evils. So this is quite a long purport. Purport. The general mass, Jai Srila Prabhupada, the general mass of people, unless they are trained systematically for a higher standard of life in spiritual values, are no better than animals. And in this verse, they have particularly been put on the level of dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. Modern university education practically prepares one to acquire a doggish mentality with which to accept the service of a greater master. After finishing a so-called education, the so-called educated persons move like dogs from door to door with applications for some service, and mostly they are driven away informed of no vacancy. As dogs are negligible animals and serve the master faithfully for bits of bread, a man serves a master faithfully without sufficient rewards. Persons who have no discrimination in the matter of foodstuff and who eat all sorts of rubbish are compared to hogs. Hogs are very much attached to eating stools. So stool is a kind of foodstuff for a particular type of animal. And even stones are eatables for a particular type of animal or bird. But the human being is not meant for eating everything and anything. He is meant to eat grains, vegetables, fruits, milk, sugar, etc. Animal food is not meant for human being. For chewing solid food, the human being has a particular type of teeth meant for cutting fruits and vegetables. The human being is endowed with 2 canine teeth as a concession for persons who will eat animal food at any cost. It is known to everyone that one man's food is another man's poison. Human beings are expected to accept the remnants of food offered to Lord Sri Krishna, and the Lord accepts foodstuff from the categories of leaves, flowers, fruits, etc. Bhagavad Gita 9:26. As prescribed by Vedic scriptures, no animal food is offered to the Lord. Therefore, a human being is meant to eat a particular type of food. He should not imitate the animals to derive so-called vitamin values. Therefore, a person who has no discrimination in regard to eating is compared to a hog. The camel is a kind of animal that takes pleasure in eating thorns. A person who wants to enjoy family life or the worldly life of so-called enjoyment is compared to the camel. Materialistic life is full of thorns, and so one should live only by the prescribed method of Vedic regulations, just to make the use of a bad bargain. Life in the material world is maintained by sucking one's own blood. The central point of attraction for material enjoyment is sex life. To enjoy sex life is to suck one's own blood, and there is not much more to be explained in this connection. The camel also sucks its own blood while chewing thorny twigs. The thorns the camel eats cut the tongue of the animal, and so blood begins to flow within the camel's mouth. The thorns mixed with fresh blood create a taste for the foolish camel, and so he enjoys the thorn-eating business with false pleasure. Similarly, the great business magnates, industrialists who work very hard to earn money by different ways and questionable means, eat the thorny results of their actions mixed with their own blood. Therefore, the Bhagavatam has situated these diseased fellows along with the camels. Would someone get me a glass of water, if you don't mind? Thank you. The ass is an animal who is celebrated as the greatest fool, even amongst the animals. The ass works very hard and carries burdens of the maximum weight without making profit for itself. I'll read the asterisk note a little bit later. The ass is generally engaged by the washerman, whose social position is not very respectable. And the special qualification of the ass is that it is very much accustomed to being kicked by the opposite sex. When the ass begs for sexual intercourse, he is kicked by the fair sex, yet still he follows the female for such sexual pleasure. A henpecked man is compared, therefore, to the ass. The general mass of people work very hard, especially in the age of Kali. In this age, the human being is actually engaged in the work of an ass, carrying heavy burdens and driving tela and rickshaws. The so-called advancement of human civilization has engaged a human being in the work of an ass. The labourers in great factories and workshops are also engaged in such burdensome work. And after working hard during the day, the poor labourer has to be again kicked by the fair sex, not only for sex enjoyment, but also for so many household affairs. You haven't taken the rubbish out yet. Why haven't you? So Srimad Bhagavatam's categorization of the common man without any spiritual enlightenment into the society of dogs, hogs, camels and asses is not at all an exaggeration. The leaders of such ignorant masses of people may feel very proud of being adored by such a number of dogs and hogs, but that is not very flattering. The Bhagavatam openly declares that although a person may be a great leader of such dogs and hogs disguised as men, if he has no taste for being enlightened in the science of Krishna, such a leader is also an animal and nothing more. He may be designated as a powerful, strong animal or a big animal, but in the estimation of Srimad Bhagavatam, he is never given a place in the category of man on account of his atheistic temperament. Or in other words, such godless leaders of dogs and hog-like men are bigger animals with the qualities of animals in greater proportion. And in the asterisk note that Prabhupada had against the sentence, the ass works very hard and carries the burdens of the maximum weight without making profit for itself, the notation is that human life is meant for earning values. This life is called artadam, or that which can deliver values. And what is the greatest value of life? It is to return home back to Godhead, as indicated in the Bhagavad Gita 8:15. One's selfishness must be aimed at the point of going back to Godhead. The ass does not know his self-interest, and it works very hard for others only. A person who works very hard for others only, forgetting his personal interest available in the human form of life, is compared to the ass. In the Brahmavata Purana it is said, Asitim chaturas chaiva laksham stan jiva jatishu brahmadvi purushay prapyam manushyam janam paryayat tad apyabalaktam jata tesham atma bhimaninam varakanam anasritya govinda charanadvayam. Just a little bit more now. The human life is so important that even the demigods in the higher planets sometimes aspire for a human body on this earth, because in the human body only can one easily go back to Godhead. In spite of having obtained such an important body, if one does not re-establish his lost eternal relation with Krishna, Govinda, he is eternally a fool who has forgotten his self-interest. This human form of material body is obtained by a gradual process of evolution to one body after another in the cycle of 8,400,000 varieties of life. And the poor man, forgetting this importance for his own interest, involves himself in so many illusory engagements for uplifting the position of others as a leader of political emancipation and economic development. There is no harm in trying for political emancipation or economic development, but one should not forget the real aim of life. All such philanthropic activities must be dovetailed in returning to Godhead. One who does not know this is compared to the ass who works only for others without their or his own welfare in mind. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So this is a very long purport, and there's some very strong messages. Very, very strong messages indeed. And so it's the duty of the Guru is to cut that knot, cut that hard knot of material attachment. But one should remember that when we're reading, Prabhupada's really slamming a lot of people, a lot of categories in that long, wonderful purport. But one should always remember Srila Prabhupada's overriding compassion. Is that actually, yes, he does give us the source, as we say, but he's also so full of love and compassion. And Srila Prabhupada's own life is a perfect example of that he virtually sacrificed everything in order to spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world. And spiritual advancement and leading a comfortable life, they're not compatible, they're incompatible. If you want to have an easygoing life, the pursuit of spiritual realization is not for you, because spiritual realization needs some tapasya, some austerity. But fortunately in Krishna consciousness, for our new guests, Prabhupada has given us a very wonderful way of life where we're chanting and dancing. You would have seen all of the lovely dancing in our prayers to our spiritual master, our founder Acharya, and eating of prasadam, which no doubt you've tasted while you've been here, and the association of wonderful friends who are like-minded in their pursuit of devotional service. So here Prabhupada's talking about the Dvipada Pashut, the two-legged animal. And, humans who do through life with their consciousness closed to spiritual matters, they're likened to a two-legged animal. Because what's the difference? Animals eat, humans eat. Animals procreate, humans procreate. Animals sleep, humans sleep. Animals defend, humans defend. So what is that distinguishing difference? The distinction is that human life, we can actually ask the big questions. And what are those big questions? Who am I? Who's God? And what is this material manifestation, this material cosmos? And it's really regrettable to waste this human form of life. And we can see all around us, everyone is frittering it away. They're just wasting their time. And it's actually very unfortunate, very unfortunate. Because Prabhupada explains here that even the demigods, even though their life is so extended, they have all kinds of enjoyment. They're, compared to our lives, we're like little insects. But they actually desire to be born on this earth planet in a human body so they can pursue spiritual life, because in the heavenly planets it's just a little bit too comfortable. But here on this earth planet we get woken up at every turn. And in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says, Krishna says, I don't know this verse, so I'll read it out. Manushyanam sahasreshu kaischid yarati sridaye yatatam apisidanam kaschid mam veti tatvadaha. Out of many thousands of men, one may endeavour for perfection, and of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So it's just an indication of how rare it is. Because as Prabhupada says in that purport, we've been evolving through the 8,400,000 species of life. And finally, we've got a human form of life. So Prabhupada stresses that there's no actual true culture among those who have no spiritual knowledge. There may be a certain appearance of refinement. They may know the operas, they may know the poems, they may be refined in their knowledge of, cultural matters, but because they're bereft of that spiritual vision, there is no true culture. And we can labour under the false impression that they're friends we've made before we came across this yoga path, or we may have strived very hard throughout our working lives, going beyond what was expected of us, putting in the hard yards. I remember at one stage I worked for 2 years overtime, of course. In publishing, you never get paid for overtime, you're just expected to do it. And I remember, I think I worked for 2 years non-stop, every day till pretty much 8 p.m. every day, from early morning to 8 p.m. And, I had a very highly developed work ethic because I'd been a devotee for some time. But when it comes to the crunch, those friends that you invested so much time and love and energy into, as soon as you displease them, you're in the bad books and they don't want to know about you. Or that employer that you worked like a lunatic for, when it's their, profit that they need to, cut their budget, they won't hesitate in retrenching you. I don't know if anyone here has worked and been made redundant. They don't care. It's just they've got their bottom dollar, and you can work like virtually like an ass, and they really don't care. So it's only when we give our all to Krishna, and we give our all to Srila Prabhupada, and we give our all to the spiritual master and the dedicated devotees of the Lord, that's when there's true profit, and that's when there's true proper use of our human form of life. And someone can say, well, even in Krishna consciousness we can be disappointed. There might be a manager a temple manager that we don't get on with, or they might not be happy with, our service. But because the environment is transcendental, even if there is some, issues along those lines, they're very transient and they're very temporary. And one can just basically transcend them. It's not something that, because we're centered around the Supreme Lord. So even there's some type of material dissatisfaction. Oh, I don't like this one, I don't like the way she's so bossy, or I don't like the way the manager deals with them. They're just unimportant things, really, because whatever we're doing in Krishna consciousness, as you know, and some of you may have heard, that it's a permanent credit in our bank account. There's no loss or diminution. And we know that when we're amongst Vaishnavas, amongst people who have that shared impetus to develop in their spiritual realization, it is a very, very joyous environment to be in. I know when I come to the farm, just seeing the devotees is uplifting. And then we have these wonderful kirtans, like our visitors here, firing us up. It's very, very wonderful. So even if you're a very dedicated corporate slave, as I once was, at the end of the day, there's really not much material benefit. And apart from, having some satisfaction that you have a work ethic that Krishna consciousness has helped you develop, there's no permanent benefit. So why is Prabhupada, or why is the scripture talking about these animals specifically? The dog, the hog, the camel and the ass. And Prabhupada gives that interesting example about the dog and the materialist. He explained that even as a dog, the dog is very stout and strong. If he doesn't have a good master, then he's in a very precarious position. So just as I pointed out, we can slave away, but if we don't have the right master, then we can trust no future, no matter how kind. And Prabhupada uses the example that modern education is actually training us to have a doggish mentality. And I really like that example where I was listening to a lecture that Prabhupada gave on this particular verse. And Prabhupada said that after someone's completed their education and they're applying for, submitting their CV to get a position, because after you've been educated, obviously you finally need to earn some money because you've been studying for 4 years or 6 years or 7 years in case of a doctor or an architect. So Prabhupada likened it to when they're applying for a position, it's like a dog wagging its tail. Choose me, choose me, choose me. And often you're met with disappointment. And I know in India I've met some young boys who've had their BA or their MA, and they're driving a bus because even after all those years, or they're in a call centre, even after all those years of study, they haven't found a position that's proportionate or relevant to their education. And Prabhupada explained in this lecture that Kshatriyas and Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, they should never, or the mercantile section of society, they should never actually seek service in another's employ. And Prabhupada gave an example of a strict Brahmin about 350 years ago. Very, very strict Brahmin, had all the qualities of a Brahmana, could teach, could disseminate Vedic knowledge, but he was really poor. He was super poor, impoverished. And so the king of the area, and this Brahmin was in Krishnagar, which is actually not far from Mayapur Dham. And the king at the time was Radha Krishna Chandra. And Krishnagar, I believe, was derived from that name. And Krishnagar, for those who don't know, it's a smallish town in India, about less than an hour from our main headquarters in India. So this huge zamindar thought, well, this Brahmana is doing really wonderful service for humanity. I'm going to go to him and see if I can help him out. So the zamindar goes to the poor Brahmin and says, oh, my dear sir, I hear that you're actually very poor. I'd like to offer you some support. And the Brahmin goes, what do you mean poor? I'm not poor. My students, they give me alms of rice in exchange for their education. And over there I have a tamarind tree. So all I need to do is my wife cooks the rice and she extracts some tamarind juice from the tamarind tree, and that's what I eat, and I'm perfectly fine. So ultimately we put very high stock on our prestigious positions. We strive to try and get, oh, my son's a doctor, or my daughter's a lawyer. These are very prestigious positions in the material world. But actually, it's in the face of reality, they are not prestigious. Now, I'm by no means saying that you shouldn't get an education, nor should you just, expect someone to give you some alms of rice after class. I like brown rice, by the way. No, I'm actually very much in favour of young devotees getting an education, because we do have to work. Sometimes we can work for the temple, in full-time temple service, and the temple will give some subsidised rent, or they will give some, cover your medicals, etc. But not everyone's in that position. And particularly when you're a married man or a married woman and you have a family to support, then, you know, it's advisable to have some kind of education there. It's not that I'm negating that, but Prabhupada's using this as a very good example that we have to have proper balance in our spiritual life. And, you know, we have to do the needful as required. So in Bhagavad Gita 3.8, Krishna says to Arjuna, and any of our scholars here who know that verse, Myatam Kuru Karma, do you know that verse? Okay, I'll read it out. I don't know it. Kama Jaya Yohya Karmana Sarita Yatrapi Jate Na Prasidyet Akamana. And Krishna says, what does he say? Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So Krishna's telling us, well, yes, we do have to support ourselves. So that's the dog reference covered. So what about the hog? Of course, for us who grew up in the West, hogs eating stool, that's unheard of. But I can assure you in India, it does take place. And it's one of their favourite things to do. And we know that that people do enjoy eating for what for to us is something abominable. And Ramai Maharaj in his class yesterday, he was mentioning caviar as everyone's very, those who think they're very cultured like to eat caviar. Of course, talking about that nearly put me off my breakfast, but nonetheless, people do like to eat such things. And the cravings of the tongue, they can hold no bounds. I mean, people eat the most abominable things. Even for a meat eater, they can eat the most abominable things, and let alone for a devotee, it's incomprehensible. If anyone's gone to our parents' places and they're cooking their meat, you kind of go, I'm just going for a walk, Mum. I'll come back in half an hour, because it's just so abominable for us, because we understand that to kill animals is a very, very sinful activity. And for every hair on the body of a cow, for example, that's how many births you will have to take again and be slaughtered time after time after time after time. So to be a vegetarian is, the Prabhupada explains, is the first step in spiritual understanding. So, and Prabhupada pointed out for those rajasic, tamasic types, those little two canine teeth we've got, that Krishna's given us those so as a concession for those who can't control their tongue at all. And I remember when I was working, and when colleagues would find out that I was a vegetarian, that I'd get 3 responses, and you all may have had the similar experience. One would be, oh no, I could never give up eating meat. I love my meat too much. And they'd look at you in horror. And I remember when I did become a vegetarian when I was about 18, before I became a devotee, and my mother was convinced I was going to die because I grew up in a very typical meat-eating family. And then the second response that I would get would be, oh, I was a vegetarian for 6 months, or I was a vegetarian for 18 months. But, you know, my boyfriend or my girlfriend, they ate meat, and it was just too hard, you know, having separate diets. And then the third response would be, oh, I don't eat much meat, because they knew, they'd feel guilty. They knew that actually you shouldn't eat meat. So in response to someone who was a vegetarian, they go, oh, but I don't eat much meat, is their way of, you know, explanation. So, of course, there's, you know, India, of course, is full of vegetarians. In the West, there's so many more vegetarians. But when I became a vegetarian, there was one vegetarian restaurant in Melbourne, and hardly anyone I knew, maybe 2 people I knew were vegetarians. And until I met the devotees a couple of years later, I just lived on brown rice and steamed vegetables with soy sauce. I had no idea what to eat. And then I met the devotees, and it was, wow, what is this wonderful prasadam? And I haven't stopped eating it since, as one can see. And once one devotee said to Prabhupada, "Oh, Prabhupada, should I take vitamins? Should I take vitamin supplements?" And Prabhupada thought for a minute, and he said, "No." He said, "Just have one sandesh a day." So my search for sandesh here is a very sad quest, as Savana Rupa can probably tell. I often complain to her, "Where's all the sandesh? Who takes all the sandesh?" It just magically disappears. So I'd really like to get a sandesh sometimes. Hint, hint, hint. And the camel and donkey example, they're used to show how bad illicit sex life is. It's destructive to one's health. I'm not talking about, in marriage for the procreation of children. I'm just talking about how the whole world is running. Everyone's trying to attract the opposite sex, either through being successful themselves. They're always trying to, do everything they can because they think that this is the ultimate enjoyment in material life. And it is the ultimate enjoyment in material life, but for spiritual life it is the most reprehensible thing, I guess one could say. So Prabhupada's saying this purport, the camel's chewing away, eating his thorns, yum yum, what's this taste? He doesn't realise that actually he's hurting his tongue. Maybe the tongue's not so sensitive in camels, I don't know, but he's chewing and he's tasting the blood as the thorns are cutting into his tongue, but into his mouth, but he thinks that's enjoyable. And Prabhupada said also, he actually gave 2 lectures on this verse in 1972, and they were quite interesting. And he explained that we have to go through thorny areas in this material world, and sometimes our garments will get entangled and they'll get torn, or our bodies will also get torn. So he was saying a bit of attention and focus will save us from these thorny areas. And for any of us who have been engaged in spiritual life for some time, when you lose your focus a little bit, how easy it is to fall into maya of varying degrees. It's really, and we all know that example Prabhupada gives, spiritual life is that razor's edge, that one little slip, very dangerous. So in that particular lecture, Prabhupada was talking about the need for focus. So we shouldn't be complacent in our spiritual life. We shouldn't think, oh yeah, Prabhupada's talking about those materialists out there. He's not talking about us. But actually, if we lose our focus, and it is very easy to lose our focus, then we can put ourselves into a very dangerous situation. So we need to help each other to stay focused. We need to be disciplined ourselves. Oh, hang on, I haven't been to Mangalati all week. What's going on here? Or, I didn't get up early enough to chant my minimum of 16 rounds. And that's something I've been thinking a lot lately, because Prabhupada keeps on saying minimum of 16 rounds. And I must confess, I don't often chant more than 16 rounds. I tend to complete my last bead on our counter beads and go, okay, I've done my 16 rounds, now I have to do this service, and now I have to do that service, and now I have to put the laundry on. But one thing I want to try and do is try and chant a bit more every day. So I don't know if everyone else chants more than 16 rounds, but it's nice if we can chant a little bit more, because Prabhupada did say minimum 16 rounds. So, Prabhupada has often explained to us, padam padam yadvipadam natesha, this material world, this danger of every step. And then he talks about the asses, how they're, when they try and mate, they get kicked in the face. He talks about how they're carrying these heavy, heavy loads. And I think in India, of course, you'll see donkeys overburdened. You're dumbfounded how these poor little things can actually walk. They're carrying such massive loads. And I believe in Mexico you might see, beasts of burden like that. And they're in such illusion that even though grass is surrounding them everywhere, they're thinking, oh, my master will give me a morsel of grass at the end of this long, arduous day. And they're frothing at the mouth trying to carry these loads. And we're a little bit like that. We think we've got to carry such heavy, heavy, heavy loads. All this, burdens of responsibility we have to take. But we should not ignore the fact that there's grass growing all around us. And then the she-ass, of course, just kicks him in the face. And I mentioned that as I was reading the report. The materialistic man, he'll come home after working very hard all day, perhaps commuting for long distances. He comes home, and what happens? It's not a nicely dressed wife with a garland ready for him, or nice, for the materialist, the nice 1950s Stepford wife with the cocktail or something waiting for the husband. No, it's what? You didn't take the garbage. You don't take me anywhere. I'm so bored. And of course these days, the husband and the wife have to both labour very hard. It's because the mortgages are ridiculous. So they're in this really kind of unhappy situation. So Prabhupada points out to us that living by the Vedic regulations, we can find peace and happiness. So yes, we're realists. We do have to work, and we do have to support our families. And, not every temple can support a large family. So it's just a matter of not shirking your responsibilities to your family or to yourself, but always maintaining that balance. What is my real centre? My real centre is not that I need a huge mansion with a pool in the backyard, but I need a sufficiently comfortable house to shelter my family, and I need to make time for devotional service. Otherwise, we become like the camels, hogs, dogs and asses. And it is such an opportunity that Prabhupada has given us. And we don't want to be this, duipada pachu, this two-legged animal. And once again, I'd just like to reiterate that we've got this privilege. It's very rare. So let's take advantage of it. Let's be compassionate to those who don't have this knowledge and not have a superiority complex, because we were all there once and we can be there again. So let's be focused, practical, and with this overwhelming mood of compassion that Srila Prabhupada had. So I'll end here. Jai Srila Prabhupada. If there's any corrections, comments, feedback? Just getting there. Cruise had one. Are you still cruise, or did you get initiated yet?
No, I still cruise.
Jai.
Thank you for the possibility. There's a very nice, elaborate explanations on the camel with the heart and dogs and hogs. Actually, you mentioned that you became a vegetarian. I think you said you became a vegetarian before you met Lord.
Yes, yeah.
So I was curious, how could you explain why you decided to become a vegetarian?
I can tell you, because I remember very, very. It was a epiphany. It was a light bulb moment. And I lived in a shared house, and one of the members of the house was a Zen Buddhist. There weren't many, there were no Buddhists. I mean, Australia was like a desert in terms of spiritual practices. But he'd somehow or other come across, Zen Buddhism. And he was out in the backyard doing his meditation. and I was just about to sit down to a awful meal of chops and potatoes with my boyfriend, and this friend came into the kitchen and he looked at me and looked what was on my plate, and he said, "Carol, don't you realise you're eating a dead body?" And I looked at him, I looked at the plate, I picked up the plate and put it in the bin, and I became a vegetarian straight away. It never occurred to me, because you're so separated from what's on your plate and what's in the pasture. So it was, I thank Krishna so much that, he sent this person who enlightened me to what I was actually doing. And that was it. Then I became, I don't know what I ate that evening, but I didn't eat that. Hare Krishna.
You were speaking about how you were in the corporate world, and for both non-devotees and devotees, it seems very enticing to be in that world successfully, or it's considered successful. But what really goes on? Are they really happy? What is the enjoyment they experience, and what are their stresses?
I could, at least speaking for myself, I could say that it wasn't. It was by necessity. I had to. I had separated from my husband, and I had no means of support, because I was always a temple devotee. I worked at the temple, the Sankirtan, BBT, lived in Mayapur for a long time. So I had to. And for some devotees that it's necessary, they can't support their family by book distribution, they have to get a job. So, the interesting thing about it is that the skills that you do learn, you can apply in Krishna consciousness. So, which I've done. The stresses, of course, are very high, because particularly when you're in a responsible position. You're not just sitting there doing data entry. You're responsible for profit and loss of a whole department, and you have to make new clients, you have to keep the existing clients happy, you have to produce, in my case, magazines that help promote their companies, etc. But it's a matter too where you have to have a really good balance, and it's not an easy thing to do. So by all means, I encourage devotees, if you wanted to go to university, go to university. But always have that goal, well, how can let me study something that I can use in Krishna's service, And there's many different ways, people might want to train to be a teacher. We have gurukuls, we have schools. They might want to train in medical field. In Mayapur at the moment, there's there's about 400 devotees in the second wave of COVID. Some have a combination of COVID and typhoid. And the little hospital is so overstretched. And there's one devotee nurse. So, you can have those kind of aspirations. So you think ultimately, yes, I can really use these things in Krishna's service. Did that answer your question, kind of?
I was kind of more after, I can understand that the devotee in any situation has mechanisms to cope. But for the non-devotee, what do they go through? That's kind of like, what is their illusory aspiration and illusory success, and what are the stresses they go through, and how do they cope, and is it successful?
Well, they cope with the Friday night after work drinks. Because all week they've been stressing, and they do stress. They get, they obviously get some material satisfaction because there's the ego involved, that, oh yes, I completed this task very well, my department head praised me for doing it, but there's not much joy, not a great deal of joy, and they compensate by things they do on the weekend. It's very common. Friday night is like a complete sense of relief goes throughout, I can only speak from my experience. I don't know if everyone else who's worked in corporate has experienced that, but everyone's struggling so hard all week. Come Friday, it's like, oh, what a relief. I don't have to work till Monday. And then Saturday and Sunday is just filled with, as much enjoyment that they can find to obliterate what they do Monday to Friday. And then come Monday, everyone's in quite a slump. And it goes on. They could never figure out why I was so kind of balanced and happy until they sussed out, oh, do you do meditation? No, yes, I do. So, it's, like Prabhupada's saying in this purport, is that it's very rare when you come to the human birth. It's very rare, and let alone actually making use of a human birth. So we have a really big obligation to do the Harinams, as you and Cruz so nicely do, and other devotees here on the farm, so people can hear the holy name. And, there was quite some time ago now, there was an article in the Times where there was a little cartoon that accompanied the article of people in the little cubicles. You know how everyone has their little cubicle in businesses? And then someone was looking over the cubicle, and there was a Hare Krishna. And the article was that, look at the person next to you. They could likely be a Hare Krishna devotee, because they started to realise that many devotees were, actually working. And, unfortunately, with the way things are in companies, you can't actually preach. They have very strict human resources laws. So if you proselytise, no matter what your religion is, it's kind of a sackable offence. So one has to be very careful in how one promotes Krishna consciousness, but I've found that it's just by how you behave and how you act in times of stress or whatever, and how you eat, what you eat, how you conduct yourself. And then when they kind of find out, oh, there's something different about this person, what is it? Then that's also, a nice example to give. But yeah, it's very hard, and I have very great sympathy for people who, are working, but they don't have an option. What option do they have? And hopefully one day they'll hear that devotee, get that book, hear the holy name. Okay, Rupa?
It seems like most of the Grihastha devotees, like living outside the farm, they very rarely see them at the temple program. Not even part of the morning program. And it seems like a lot of them they put their Christian consciousness right way back on the back burner. And but it seems like, okay, some of them maybe they've got corporate jobs or full-time jobs, and it's very hard for them. They've got to start early in the morning. It's hard for them to come to the temple, but it seems like it would be possible for a number of them to come here for part of the morning program, but it's just they become maybe a little slack, and as I said, put Krishna consciousness way back and just put their responsibilities in the forefront of their life. So how to maybe convince a lot of these devotees that they do have the possibility of coming to the temple programs more often. They can make an effort.
Well, it's always lovely to see more, devotees who come to the temple. It's inspiring for everybody, but I think one has to be very careful not to presume what goes on in their homes, because I know a lot of devotees who don't come to the temple during the week, but they get up and they perform Mangalati. They have deities, they do Mangalati at home. I know quite a few devotees who do that. So, we shouldn't be too hasty in presuming that because they're not at the temple, they're not doing their puja at home. Because, when you've got, a lot of our devotees work in construction, so they have to be ready for work by 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. Not easy for them to come to the temple, they're working hard all day. And other devotees might have jobs in town or in the Gold Coast, but we shouldn't presume that they're not getting up as early as devotees who are coming to Mangalati. And we can encourage, but we shouldn't be too judgmental, and we shouldn't be sure that they're not doing the things that we're doing here, because I know many do. They just can't do both. Okay? All right. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you for listening.